The person you love went on a dinner date with their ex last night. But something happened there that you need to know. Do not scroll away from this yet, because what happened at that dinner was not what it looked like from the outside. If you heard that the person you love sat across a table from their ex last night, your heart might immediately tell you the worst story possible. You might imagine old feelings returning. You might wonder whether something you thought was finished has suddenly started again. You might even feel that familiar heaviness in your chest, the kind that makes you ask questions you are almost afraid to have answered. But stay here, because in this fictional story, that dinner did not bring them closer to their past. It forced them to finally see why their past no longer felt like home. And before the night was over, something happened at that table that made them think about you in a way they could no longer ignore. Listen carefully, because the truth begins before they even arrived at the restaurant. They almost canceled. More than once. They stood there looking at the message from their ex, wondering whether meeting was a mistake. The invitation itself had sounded harmless enough. Can we talk over dinner? There are some things I think we should finally clear up. No romantic language. No confession. No promise of anything beginning again. Just unfinished business. And maybe that was exactly why they agreed. Because there had been questions left hanging in the past, things neither person had ever fully said, emotions that had been buried beneath silence rather than actually resolved. The person you love told themselves this dinner was about closure. Nothing else. They believed they could sit across from someone who once mattered, speak honestly, and walk away lighter. But what they did not expect was that the evening would show them something about their own heart. Something about you. And something about the difference between remembering someone and still belonging with them. When they arrived, their ex was already there. For one brief second, familiarity rushed through them. The same face. The same mannerisms. The same way their ex looked up when they approached. Memory is strange like that. It can make the past feel close even when your heart has traveled far away from it. They sat down. There was an awkward smile. A few ordinary words. They talked about work. About people they both knew. About things that had changed. And if someone had been watching from across the room, they might have assumed this was two people reconnecting. But inside the person you love, something very different was happening. They were noticing absence. Not the absence of attraction. Not even the absence of care. Something deeper. The emotional pull that once controlled them was not there anymore. They looked across the table and realized they were looking at a person they knew deeply, but no longer felt called toward. That realization surprised them. They had carried the memory of this relationship for so long that a part of them assumed meeting again would awaken something powerful. Instead, they felt distance. Not coldness. Distance. The kind that tells you a chapter mattered but has ended. And then their ex asked the question that changed the direction of the entire dinner. Is there someone else? The person you love froze for half a second. They had not mentioned you. They had not planned to mention you. Maybe your connection had never been given a simple label. Maybe they were still trying to understand exactly what you meant to them. But when that question was asked, your face entered their mind immediately. Not after careful consideration. Immediately. And that frightened them because spontaneous truth is often more revealing than prepared answers. Their ex noticed the pause. There is, isn't there? They asked. The person you love looked down for a moment. They could have denied it. They could have said, it's complicated. They could have changed the subject. But something about sitting there with the past directly in front of them made lying feel impossible. So they said, quietly, there is someone I care about. And the moment those words left their mouth, something shifted. Because saying it to themselves was one thing. Thinking about you late at night was one thing. Missing you privately was one thing. But saying aloud to someone from their past, there is someone I care about, made the connection real in a new way. Their ex leaned back slightly. They did not look angry. They looked curious. Do they know? And again, the person you love did not have an easy answer. Do you know? Do you truly know how they feel? Or have you been forced to interpret their silence, their attention, their hesitation, their moments of closeness and distance? Maybe you sense the truth, but sensing is not the same as hearing someone say it clearly. That question made them uncomfortable because they knew they had not given you the clarity you deserved. Their ex looked at them for a moment and then said something unexpected. You look different when you talk about them. That sentence hit them strangely. They asked what that meant. Their ex smiled, but there was sadness in the smile. You look calm. Calm. That was not the word they expected. They expected happy. Excited. Nervous. But calm? And suddenly they started thinking about you differently. Maybe that was what they had never understood about this connection. You did not only create butterflies. You created stillness. Even during confusing moments, there was something about you that felt familiar. Something that made them want to exhale. Something that allowed them to imagine not constantly defending themselves. And sitting across from their ex, they realized how different that was from the relationship they once had. Their past had often felt intense. Powerful. Unpredictable. There were highs that felt unforgettable and lows that left both of them exhausted. Back then, they had mistaken intensity for depth. They believed if something hurt badly enough, it must matter deeply. If someone could make your heart race with fear and excitement, maybe that meant passion. But you had shown them another kind of connection. One where attention could feel gentle. One where being understood did not always come with conflict. One where they could imagine stability without boredom. And that comparison was happening inside them whether they wanted it to or not. Now, before we go deeper, if you enjoy these emotional soulmate-style stories and you want to hear what happens after this dinner, subscribe and stay connected, because the most important moment of this night has not happened yet. What their ex said next forced them to confront something they had been avoiding about you, and it may completely change the way you understand their recent silence. Their ex took a sip of their drink and asked, "Are you happy with this person?" The person you love answered too quickly. Yes. Then they stopped because they had surprised themselves. No hesitation. No complicated explanation. Just yes. Their ex noticed. Then why do you sound scared? That question landed hard. Because they were scared. Not of you exactly. Scared of what caring this much could require. Scared that they had already waited too long to tell you. Scared that you might not feel the same anymore. Scared that their past patterns might follow them into something that deserved better. And for a moment, sitting across from someone who knew many of their old patterns firsthand, they became painfully aware of how much they had not changed in certain ways. They still withdrew when emotions became intense. They still overthought conversations that should have been simple. They still sometimes treated silence as protection. Their ex knew that version of them. Maybe too well. And then their ex said something that neither of them expected to say during this dinner. Don't do to them what you did to us. The person you love became still. There was no accusation in the tone. No anger. Just honesty. And because it came from the past, it carried weight. Their ex continued. When something mattered to you, you would disappear into your own head. You would decide what everyone else was thinking without asking. You would get scared and then act like you didn't care. If this person means something to you, don't make them guess. That sentence cracked something open. Because maybe the person you love had been telling themselves their hesitation was wisdom. That they were simply moving carefully. That they needed more time. That eventually everything would become clear. But someone who had once loved them was now holding up a mirror and saying, "This is a pattern. You have done this before." And patterns do not disappear simply because the person in front of you changes. They disappear when you finally recognize them and choose differently. Their first instinct was defensiveness. They wanted to say the old relationship had been complicated. That both people made mistakes. That their ex had hurt them too. All of that may have been true. But something stopped them. Because this conversation was not about assigning blame. It was about seeing themselves clearly. And somewhere inside, they knew their ex was right about this one thing. When the person you love becomes afraid, they become difficult to read. Instead of saying, "This matters to me and that scares me," they become quieter. Instead of asking for reassurance, they create distance. Instead of explaining their confusion, they hope time will explain it for them. And maybe that pattern had already touched your connection. Maybe you had felt them becoming distant after particularly meaningful moments. Maybe every time the connection seemed about to deepen, something pulled them backward. You may have wondered if they regretted getting close. But perhaps they were not regretting closeness. Perhaps closeness was exposing fear. And last night, their ex named it directly. You run when you care, they said. The person you love looked away because that sentence was almost impossible to argue with. And then something even stranger happened. Their ex smiled and said, "You're thinking about them right now, aren't you?" Yes. They were. Sitting at dinner with the person from their past, all they could think about was you. Not because they were comparing appearances. Not because they were trying to decide who was better. Love is not a competition like that. They were thinking about the way you had responded to their distance. The times you did not chase them. The times you gave them space. The moments when you gently asked whether everything was okay. The conversations where you tried to give them an opportunity to be honest and they gave you half an answer instead. Suddenly, they saw those moments through a different lens. You had not been asking for too much. You may simply have been asking them not to repeat an old pattern with a new person. And their chest tightened at the thought that they might already have hurt you without intending to. Their ex noticed their expression. You really love them, they said. This time the person you love did not immediately respond. The word love felt large. Dangerous. But their silence was different from earlier silences. It was not denial. It was recognition. They had been carefully using safer words. Care. Connection. Feelings. Something special. But what if all those safer words were simply ways of avoiding the word that frightened them most? Love. Their ex asked again, softer this time, do you? And finally, the person you love said, I think I do. That was the moment. Maybe nobody else heard it over the sounds of the restaurant. Maybe it looked completely ordinary from the outside. But internally, something changed. They had just admitted to their ex that they loved someone else. You. And instead of feeling guilty, confused, or pulled backward, they felt relief. A deep, unexpected relief. Like saying the truth finally allowed their heart to stop arguing with itself. Their ex was quiet. You might expect jealousy here. Anger. A dramatic reaction. But that is not what happened. Instead, their ex said, then this dinner needed to happen. The person you love looked confused. Why? Their ex answered, because I think part of you needed to see me again to understand that you're not still waiting for this. That sentence brought the entire night into focus. Perhaps that was the unfinished business. Not getting back together. Not reopening the past. Seeing it clearly enough to stop romanticizing it. Memory has a habit of polishing old relationships. With enough distance, people remember the beautiful moments and forget the reason something became impossible. The person you love may have carried a question somewhere deep inside, what if? What if things had been different? What if the timing had changed? What if both people had matured? But sitting across from their ex now, they realized those questions no longer held the same power. They cared about this person as someone who had once shared part of their life. But the desire to return was gone. And knowing that made one other truth impossible to ignore. Their heart was somewhere else now. With you. But do not assume this instantly solved everything. In some ways, it made the conflict bigger. Because now they could no longer blame the past for why they had not stepped fully toward you. They could no longer tell themselves they needed closure first. Closure was sitting across from them saying, go be honest with the person you love. So what excuse remained? Fear. Just fear. Their ex asked them one final difficult question. What are you afraid will happen if you tell them? The person you love thought about it for a long moment. Then they gave an answer they had never said aloud before. I'm afraid they'll tell me I waited too long. There it was. The deepest fear. Not rejection from the beginning. Timing. The possibility that you once would have welcomed their honesty, but their hesitation changed something. The possibility that while they were trying to become ready, you were learning how to let go. The possibility that your silence now was not waiting but acceptance. Acceptance that maybe they were never going to give you clarity. And the person you love realized that this fear had become self-perpetuating. The more afraid they became that they had waited too long, the longer they waited because reaching out felt even riskier. Their ex shook their head gently. Then waiting longer won't help. Simple words. Brutal truth. If they had waited too long, another week would not repair it. If you still cared, silence would not strengthen the connection. Either way, honesty was the only path forward. That realization changed the atmosphere of the dinner. Something had been completed. The person you love no longer felt like they were sitting across from an unresolved love. They were sitting across from a teacher from another chapter of their life. Someone who, ironically, was helping them avoid repeating the same mistake with you. And then their ex did something unexpected. They reached across the table, not romantically, but gently, and said, "I hope you don't lose something good because you're still afraid of something that happened with me." Those words went deeper than anything else said that night. Because there it was. The connection between past and present. Maybe their ex had hurt them. Maybe they had hurt each other. Maybe the relationship taught them to associate closeness with danger. But you had not done those things. And yet part of the person you love had been treating you as though you might. They had been asking you to pay emotional debts created by someone else. Every time they expected you to leave without evidence. Every time they withheld honesty because someone once used vulnerability against them. Every time they pulled away because closeness had once ended painfully. You were receiving consequences from a chapter you did not write. And suddenly that felt deeply unfair to them. They thought about your patience again. The way you had perhaps tried to understand rather than judge. The way you remained softer than they expected. And they felt an urge to speak to you that was stronger than anything they had felt before. Not because the dinner made them jealous. Not because they wanted to use you as an escape from their ex. The opposite. The dinner showed them that the past no longer had the right to control how they approached the future. Eventually the meal ended. Their ex smiled as they stood to leave. There was no dramatic embrace. No lingering romantic glance. Just two people who understood that something had finally been put where it belonged, behind them. Before walking away, their ex said one last sentence, "Tell them before fear tells the story for you." The person you love carried those words outside. The night air felt different. Their phone was in their hand almost immediately. And whose conversation did they open? Yours. They stared at your name. Scrolled through recent messages. Saw moments where perhaps your warmth had slowly become more cautious. Saw unanswered opportunities. Saw all the things they had thought they could explain later. And suddenly later felt dangerous. They began typing. First, "Can we talk?" Then deleted it. Too vague. Then, "Something happened tonight that made me think about us." Deleted again. Too mysterious. They were tired of making you guess. So they tried something honest. I realize tonight that I have let my past affect the way I've treated something that matters to me now. They stopped. Read it again. Their heart was pounding. Then they added, and I think you deserve to know what I should have told you sooner. That was where they paused. Because the next sentence would be the hardest one. The sentence that would finally explain why they had pulled away even when they cared, why they became quieter every time you moved closer, and why seeing their ex last night somehow made them more certain about you instead of less. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then their phone lit up with something they were not expecting. A message had come in. Not from their ex. From you. Your name appeared at exactly the moment they were preparing to confess. They stared at the notification, suddenly afraid to open it, because they had no idea whether your message was casual, emotional, or perhaps something they had been fearing for weeks. But when they finally opened it, the first few words made their stomach drop. Because your message suggested that you had noticed their distance far more clearly than they realized. And now they had to decide whether to finally tell you the whole truth about last night. Or risk watching the one connection they truly wanted become another chapter they would spend years wishing they had handled differently. You came back because you knew that message from you changed everything. The person you love had just stepped outside after one of the most emotionally clarifying dinners of their life. Their ex had forced them to see something they had been avoiding for a long time. The past was not holding them anymore. Fear was. And just when they finally found the courage to type the truth to you, your name appeared on their screen. Their hearts stopped for a second. Because your message did not feel casual. It did not feel like one of those easy conversations people use to avoid deeper things. There was weight in it. There was distance in it. And there was something else that frightened them even more: acceptance. The kind of acceptance that comes when someone has almost stopped expecting anything. Stay with me here, because this is where the emotional direction of the entire story changes. Your message said, "I don't know what has been happening with you lately, but I feel like something between us has changed. I don't want to force a conversation you don't want to have. I just needed you to know that I noticed." They read those words once. Then again. Then a third time. And each time the sentence felt heavier. Not because you were angry. Anger might have been easier. Anger would have meant you were still fighting for something. But your message was calm. Respectful. Almost too calm. You were not demanding an explanation. You were not accusing them. You were simply saying, "I see the distance. I feel it. And I am no longer going to pretend I don't." That quiet honesty scared them more than any argument could have. Because suddenly, everything their ex had said at dinner became real. Don't make them guess. You run when you care. Tell them before fear tells the story for you. And now fear had already begun telling the story. Through their silence. Through their hesitation. Through the emotional space they had allowed to grow between you. They stared at your message and realized something painful: you had started forming conclusions because they had left you without information. You were trying to protect yourself from confusion. And they had created that confusion. Not intentionally. But impact does not disappear simply because intention was good. That realization made them want to answer immediately. Their fingers moved quickly. You're right. Something has changed. They stopped. Deleted it. Too frightening. It sounded like the beginning of an ending, and that was not what they meant. They tried again. I've been distant, but not for the reason you probably think. Deleted again. Too vague. They were doing it again. Creating mystery where there needed to be clarity. So they put the phone down for a moment and breathed. They remembered the entire dinner. The way their ex looked across the table and asked whether there was someone else. The way your face immediately appeared in their mind. The way saying, "There is someone I care about," had felt like relief rather than betrayal. The way they finally admitted, "I think I do love them." They had said those words about you to someone else before they had ever said them to you. And suddenly that felt wrong. Not morally wrong. Emotionally backwards. You were the person who deserved to hear the truth, yet everyone except you seemed to be getting closer to it. And that thought gave them the courage to begin again. They typed, "You're right to notice the distance. I have been pulling back, and I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to guess why." This time, they did not delete it. They read it slowly. It felt uncomfortable. But honest. Then they wrote, "It wasn't because I stopped caring. It was almost the opposite." Their hearts started racing harder. Because that sentence opened the door. Once they sent it, they could not retreat into casual conversation. They would have to explain. And part of them still wanted to wait until they had perfect words. But then they remembered what you had said long ago, you did not need them to have all the answers. You just needed them to be real. So they continued. "The closer I felt to you, the more afraid I became that I would mess it up." There it was. The truth beneath the distance. Not boredom. Not another person. Not loss of feeling. Fear. They stared at the screen, surprised by how simple the truth looked once it was written. For weeks, maybe months, their emotions had felt complicated. But perhaps the core was not complicated at all. They cared. Caring made them vulnerable. Vulnerability triggered old fear. Old fear created distance. Distance created confusion. Confusion made you protect yourself. And now the connection was sitting at the edge of a misunderstanding that could become permanent if nobody spoke honestly. They looked at your message again. "I don't want to force a conversation you don't want to have." That sentence hurt them deeply because they did want the conversation. They had wanted it many times. They had imagined talking to you late at night. Imagined admitting things they never said. Imagined asking whether you felt the same. But imagination had been safer than reality. In imagination, you could never reject them. In imagination, timing could always be perfect. In imagination, nothing had consequences. Real love is different. Real love asks you to stop rehearsing and start speaking. And last night, perhaps for the first time, they were ready. But before they replied, another thought returned from dinner. Their ex had said, "I hope you don't lose something good because you're still afraid of something that happened with me." The person you love realized that if they were going to explain themselves to you, they had to tell you at least part of what happened that evening. Not because they wanted to make you jealous. Not because the dinner was romantic. But because the dinner had been the catalyst. It had shown them the contrast between what they once accepted as love and what they now wanted. And what they wanted was connected to you. So they added another sentence. I need to tell you something that might sound strange at first. I had dinner with my ex tonight. They almost deleted that immediately. Their stomach tightened because they imagined your reaction. Maybe disappointment. Maybe anger. Maybe the feeling that your worst fear had just been confirmed. But hiding it would only repeat the old pattern. If honesty was going to be different this time, it had to include the uncomfortable parts too. They continued quickly before fear could stop them. It wasn't what you might think. We met because there were things from the past that needed closure, and something happened during that conversation that made me realize I have been unfair to you. Now the truth was out. Not fully, but enough that the next step was inevitable. They pressed send. And the moment the message left their phone, panic rushed through them. You know that feeling when you finally say something you have been holding for too long and instantly wish you could pull the words back into your body? That was what they felt. They stared at the screen. Delivered. No answer. 10 seconds felt like 10 minutes. They started thinking of everything that could go wrong. What if you stopped reading after, I had dinner with my ex? What if that alone was enough to close the door? What if you had already decided you were tired of uncertainty and this confirmed every fear? They wanted to send another message immediately. Explain everything. Send paragraphs. But something stopped them. Maybe maturity. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the memory of what their ex had said about giving another person freedom. They had told the truth. Now they had to let you respond in your own time. And that was harder than expected. Because honesty can feel like control when you are the one holding it. You think, once I explain myself, everything will make sense. But the other person still gets to have feelings about what happened. They get to be hurt. Confused. Skeptical. They get to need time. And the person you love was beginning to understand that loving you meant respecting that too. A minute passed. Then another. And finally, your message appeared. Why did you go? 4 words. No accusation. No emotional explosion. Just a question. And somehow that question gave them hope because you were still willing to hear the answer. They typed, because I thought there were questions I needed answered about the past. I thought maybe I needed closure. They paused. Then added, but the dinner showed me I already had closure. I just hadn't accepted it. You read it. No response yet. They continued, because this was the part they needed you to understand. Sitting across from them didn't make me miss what we had. It made me realize how different I feel when I think about you. This was vulnerable now. No turning back. They asked if there was someone else. I thought of you immediately. They looked at those words and felt something inside them loosen. Because the truth was finally moving in the right direction. Toward you. The person it belonged with. And if you enjoy stories like this where everything slowly comes into the light, subscribe and stay close, because what happens in this conversation next is the part that changes both of them. The dinner was only the beginning. The real revelation happens when you finally ask the question they have been terrified to answer. Your next message came after a pause. Then why have you been acting like you don't want me close? There it was. The question they knew was coming. The question their ex had essentially asked in another form. If you care, why do you pull away? And this time they could not answer with timing. Could not say work was stressful. Could not say they were confused. They had to go deeper. They typed slowly. Because closeness scares me more when it's real. Then another line. And with you, it started feeling real. They waited. Your typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally you wrote, "Do you know what that felt like from my side?" The person you love closed their eyes for a second. They knew the answer was probably painful. "No," they replied. "But I want you to tell me." And that sentence was perhaps more important than any confession. Because they were finally listening rather than defending. They were giving you space to describe your experience without immediately explaining theirs. You answered, "It felt like every time I trusted you a little more, you gave me a reason to question whether I should have." That hurt. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. You continued. "I kept thinking maybe I imagined the connection. Maybe I was reading too much into things. And eventually I got tired of trying to figure out what you weren't saying." They read that slowly. Every word. And they imagined you alone, replaying conversations, questioning yourself, wondering whether your intuition had misled you. They realized that while they had been afraid of being hurt, you had been hurting in a quieter way. Not because they rejected you directly. Because they never gave you enough clarity to know whether you were being rejected at all. Ambiguity can sometimes hurt more than a clean answer. A clean answer lets you grieve. Ambiguity keeps hope and fear alive at the same time. And they had kept you there. The person you love typed, "I'm sorry." Then stopped. The words felt too small, but sometimes small honest words are better than elaborate excuses. "You didn't imagine it," they added. "That's the part one should have told you. You didn't imagine what was between us. I felt it too. I still do." This time, the silence after the message felt different. Less panicked. More exposed. They had finally said something you may have wanted to hear for a long time. But you did not immediately respond with relief. Instead, you asked, "What exactly do you feel?" Their heart raced again. Because now the safer words were running out. Care. Connection. Something. All those vague words could no longer protect them. They remembered what they said at dinner. "I think I do love them." Would they finally say it to you? The person who had actually inspired the words? They stared at the question. "What exactly do you feel?" And after several minutes, they typed, "I love you." Then they froze. 3 words. They had imagined them being dramatic. Beautiful. Perfectly timed. Instead, they looked almost ordinary on a phone screen. but perhaps that made them more powerful. No music. No perfect setting. Just truth. They immediately added, "I'm not saying that to pressure you. I should have said it because it was true, not because I expected anything back." And there it was again, freedom. They were learning. Love was not a demand. Confession did not create debt. You did not owe them the same words simply because they had finally found the courage to say theirs. You read the message. No answer came for a long time. And during that silence, the person you love confronted every fear they had spent months avoiding. Maybe you did not love them anymore. Maybe you once did but had protected yourself so successfully that the feeling changed. Maybe the words arrived too late. They had to accept all of those possibilities. This was the price of honesty. Not guaranteed happiness. Reality. But something strange happened as they waited. Even with the fear, they felt lighter. Because for the first time, whatever happened next would happen between two people who knew the truth. No more hiding behind ambiguity. No more hoping the other person could somehow decode everything. They had given you the truth. And now the future could be built, or not built, on something real. Finally, your reply came. I don't know what to say. Their hearts sank slightly. But then another message followed. Part of me has wanted to hear that for a long time. They stopped breathing for a moment. Then you continued. But another part of me is angry that it took you this long. That was fair. More than fair. The person you love felt an instinct to explain. To defend. To say they had been scared. To talk about their past. But they caught themselves. You already knew they had been scared. Fear explained the behavior. It did not erase the impact. So they replied, "You're allowed to be angry." That was new for them too. Not trying to manage your emotions. Not needing you to forgive quickly so they could feel better. Simply giving you permission to experience what was real. You answered, "I don't want another cycle where you tell me something deep and then disappear tomorrow because you feel exposed." That sentence went straight to the core. Because that was exactly the pattern their ex had described. Open. Panic. Retreat. Repeat. And you had noticed it too. The person you love knew that words alone would not fix this. They could say, "I love you," 100 times, but if their behavior still made you feel unsafe, love would become another beautiful sentence sitting on top of the same old pattern. So they wrote, "I don't want that either. And I know saying this tonight doesn't prove anything. I have to show you differently." Read that carefully, because that is when the confession became more than emotion. It became intention. Not a promise of perfection. A willingness to change behavior. They continued, "If I get scared, I want to learn to tell you I'm scared instead of making you think I don't care. If I need space, I want to say that instead of disappearing. And if something changes, I want you to hear it from me, not have to feel it through silence." Your reply did not come immediately. But when it did, it was softer. That's all I wanted. For words that somehow contained months of exhaustion. You had not wanted a grand romantic performance. You wanted emotional clarity. You wanted to know that closeness would not constantly be followed by unexplained distance. You wanted honesty even when the truth was imperfect. And finally, they were hearing you. The person you love sat there outside under the night sky, thinking about how strange it was that dinner with an ex had led to this conversation with you. The past had not pulled them backward. It had pushed them toward honesty. But there was still one piece of the dinner they had not told you. One part they were almost afraid to mention because they did not know how you would receive it. Their ex had said something about you. Not personally, they did not know you. But after listening to the person you love describe the connection, their ex made an observation that stayed with them. You talk about this person like you're afraid they're the one person who could actually make you stay. At the time, the person you love laughed nervously. But now the sentence came back. Stay. That word had always been complicated for them. They knew how to leave. How to pull away. How to protect themselves. How to survive endings. But staying requires a different kind of courage. Staying when things are vulnerable. Staying through uncomfortable conversations. Staying without losing yourself. Staying because you choose connection rather than because you fear loneliness. And perhaps that was what you represented to them. Not some magical guarantee of forever. A reason to finally learn how to stay present. They told you this part too. My ex said something tonight that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You replied, what? They hesitated. Then typed, they said I talk about you like I'm afraid you're someone who could actually make me stay. Your typing indicator appeared almost immediately. What does that mean to you? Another honest question. And the person you love thought about it. Then answered, I think it means I'm used to preparing for endings. With you, I started imagining what it would look like to build instead. That sentence surprised even them. Build. Not chase. Not survive. Build. Something steady. Something two people participate in. Something that requires communication instead of guessing. And for the first time all night, your answer contained warmth. I imagine that too. Those words changed the air around them. Because suddenly the possibility was shared. Not guaranteed. Not finalized. But shared. You had imagined something too. Maybe while they were pulling away, you had been trying to protect a hope you did not want destroyed. Maybe both of you had been more afraid than either person realized. And now, finally, fear was being translated into language instead of distance. But this conversation was still not finished. Because you had one more question. A question that would decide whether this was simply an emotional night or the beginning of something genuinely different. You asked, so what happens now? The person you love stared at those words. In the past, this question would have terrified them because it sounded like a demand for the entire future. But tonight, they heard it differently. What happens now? Not forever. Now. What is the next honest step? They remembered everything they had learned. Do not promise what you cannot guarantee. Do not hide what is already true. Do not ask the other person to carry the relationship alone. Give them freedom. Show up consistently. So they answered, I think we stop pretending we don't know what this is. And we take it slowly, honestly, one step at a time. Then they added, if you still want that. Because your choice mattered. Your freedom mattered. And for the first time, they were not trying to secure an answer through emotional intensity. They were inviting you into a conversation. You read it. And then you sensed something that changed their expression completely. A message so simple that it almost made them laugh from relief. I'm willing to talk. But I need actions to match the words. They smiled. Not because everything was solved. But because that was real. You had not rejected them.